Do you seek a wife or my body? The giant mail-order bride asked. The rancher whispered, I want your body too. Mara Quinn wasn't the kind of woman men sent for unless they were desperate. 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and stronger than most ranch hands in Wyoming territory. Yet she'd crossed 1,000 miles by train, clutching one letter from a lonely rancher who promised a home. When she stepped onto his land, the world seemed to stop. Her sighs, her silence, her sadness, all too much for a man who'd buried his wife 3 winters ago. But when she met his eyes and asked, Do you seek a wife or my body? Something inside him broke free. He whispered, I want your body too, not as lust, but as confession. But who was this man who saw beyond her scars? Why did a widowed rancher risk everything for a woman the frontier mocked? And how could one question, born of fear and fire, ignite a love powerful enough to rewrite their fate? The station at Cheyenne was nearly empty when the train groaned to a stop. Smoke curled above the iron wheels, blending with the last streaks of orange sky. The whistle echoed across the plains like a cry that didn't want to end. Mara stood still on the platform, boots heavy with dust, the letter trembling between her fingers. For a long moment she couldn't move. She had spent her whole life being too much, too tall, too quiet, too strange, and yet here she was, sent for by a man who'd only seen her handwriting. Her heart thudded painfully when she saw him. Silas Danner, the rancher. He stood apart from the few others waiting, hat low, shoulders square, eyes shadowed by years of hard sun and harder loss. Even from a distance, she saw the weariness in him, the kind born of war and widowing. His left hand bore the faint white line of a ring long gone. His clothes were plain, his posture rigid. But his eyes, when they lifted to hers, were steady, the world around them blurred. The sound of the engine, the shuffle of passengers, the wind, it all faded. Only their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. You're taller than I expected, he finally said, voice low but even. Mara's lips curved, just slightly. And you're quieter. For a heartbeat, something like amusement flickered in his expression. Then it vanished. He gestured to the wagon behind him. We've got a long ride ahead, she nodded and followed. Each step away from the platform felt like stepping out of her old life and into something she didn't understand. The wooden wheels creaked as he lifted her trunk into the wagon bed. When she climbed up, she caught his hand briefly. It was calloused, warm, and trembling just a little. The sun dropped behind the hills, leaving streaks of violet and gold. They rode for miles through land so open it felt like the sky might swallow them. Mara watched the horizon, the endless fields of sage and yellow grass bending beneath the wind. Every now and then she glanced at Silas, trying to read the story carved into his silence. The letter he'd sent had been short. A man of few words. I own a ranch. My wife is gone. I need help raising my boy. I can offer you safety, work, and a home. If that's enough, come. She had answered with the only truth she had. I am strong. I can work. I have nowhere else to go. Now, sitting beside him, she realized that neither of them had written what they truly meant. When the last light faded, the stars came alive, sharp and endless. The cold began to creep in, biting through her sleeves. Silas stopped the wagon near a small stream to let the horses drink. The sound of water broke the silence. He offered her a tin cup. She took it, her fingers brushing his. Then, without meaning to, the question that had lived in her chest since she left Pennsylvania slipped out. Do you seek a wife? Mr. Danner, she asked quietly, or my body? The air froze. Even the horses stopped shifting. Silas turned slowly toward her. His jaw tightened, and his breath clouded in the chill air. For a moment he didn't speak. Then finally, he said in a voice so low it nearly broke, I want your body too, because it carries the soul I've prayed for. Her eyes widened. The words weren't hunger, they were something holier. He looked at her as if she were a place he could rest. Neither spoke again for the rest of the journey. But something between them had changed, something fragile, trembling, alive. The Danner Ranch appeared just before dawn, a stretch of land framed by pale mountains and a sky washed in silver. Fences leaned, the barn sagged, the house looked tired. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. A small figure stood in the doorway, thin, still, watching. "That's Noah," Silas said quietly. "My boy." Mara saw the way his shoulders straightened when he said it, like the name itself was armor. The boy couldn't have been more than 7. His eyes were dark, solemn, too old for his small frame. When the wagon stopped, Noah didn't run to his father. He just looked, expression unreadable. Mara smiled gently, but he didn't return it. "Morning, Noah," Silas said, lifting the boy into his arms. The child stayed silent, his fingers clinging to his father's collar. "This is Miss Quinn. She's come to help us." Noah's gaze flicked to her, quick, curious, cautious. He didn't say a word. Then he buried his face in his father's shoulder. Mara's chest ached. She knew that kind of silence. It wasn't shyness, it was pain turned inward, the kind no one could name. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and loneliness. The floorboards creaked. Dust gathered on the shelves. It was a home that had forgotten how to breathe. Without waiting for direction, Mara set down her bag, rolled up her sleeves and opened the windows. "What are you doing?" Silas asked, frowning slightly. Letting the past out, she said simply. He said nothing more. For hours she scrubbed, dusted, swept, until light poured across clean wooden floors. She boiled water, washed curtains, and baked the last of the flour into bread. Silas tried to help once, but she shook her head. "You mend fences," she told him. "I'll mend the home." By evening the air inside was warm again. Noah sat by the table, nibbling the bread quietly. His small hand brushed hers when she passed him the butter. He didn't pull away this time. Silas stood near the door, hat in his hands, watching. "You didn't have to do all this," Mara smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." He looked at her then, not at her size, not at her strength, but at the woman herself. Something in her face softened the edges of his grief. She was unlike anyone he'd ever known. She didn't try to fill the silence. She honored it. When the lanterns burned low, Mara went to her room. She lay on the narrow bed, staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to the wind outside. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Not loved, just safe. It was enough. For now. In the next room, Silas sat beside the fire, Noah asleep on his lap. He held the letter Mara had written him months ago, tracing her words with his thumb. Her handwriting was strong, unflinching, like her. He remembered how he'd almost thrown her letter away. He had told himself he didn't need anyone. But something about her words, "I can work, I have nowhere else to go," had sounded like his own reflection. Outside, the coyotes howled. The wind rattled the windows. In that quiet, he realized how long it had been since he'd wanted to speak to anyone, since he'd wanted to listen. Upstairs, Mara turned over, her hair spilling across the pillow. She thought about his eyes when he said he wanted her body too, not as a man wanting a woman, but as a broken soul reaching for another. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat tremble under her palm. The moonlight spilled across the floor, painting silver over the walls. The night smelled of rain and horses and new beginnings, but new beginnings have their own ghosts. In town, people had already begun to whisper. Word travels fast in Wyoming territory, and faster when a woman stands taller than most men. "Dan has brought himself a giant," they said at the saloon. "She'll scare his cattle clean to Texas." Mara didn't know yet that her name was already on their tongues. She didn't know how the same hands that waved politely on Sundays would point behind her back by Monday, and Silas didn't. Know that Caleb Ward, his late wife's brother, had heard about his new bride from the mail train conductor. Caleb was already on his way, ready to remind Silas that some men don't deserve second chances, but that would come later. For now, under the cold Wyoming moon, two strangers slept under the same roof, breathing the same air, carrying the same ache for something they didn't know how to name. And somewhere between their loneliness and their longing, a quiet promise began to form, something that felt like hope, or maybe danger, because out here on the frontier, love didn't come softly. It came like thunder across dry land, unpredictable, untamed, and too wild to ever be forgotten. The sun rose slow and heavy over the Bighorn Plains, washing the sky in soft bands of gold and pink. The Dana ranch creaked awake to the sound of horses stamping, wind in the cottonwoods, and the faint cry of roosters. Mara was already outside before dawn, sleeves rolled high, her long braids swinging against her back as she hauled a pail of water from the well. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she welcomed it. She'd known colder mornings in Pennsylvania mines, where the air smelled of soot and sorrow. Silas watched her from the porch, arms crossed, coffee steaming in his hand. He still couldn't quite believe she'd come, this woman who towered over the world like she'd been carved from it. She wasn't like the other mail-order brides he'd heard about in town. She didn't chatter or fuss, didn't ask what she'd be paid, didn't flinch when the wind slapped dust across her face. She just worked. Steady, quiet, relentless. By the time the sun was full in the sky, she had already mended the chicken pen, cleaned the smokehouse, and stacked wood higher than the porch rail. Silas found her kneeling beside the fence post, her hands bleeding from the wire. "You'll tear your palms to ribbons," he said, walking over. She looked up at him, sweat glistening at her temple. Her little blood never scared a Quinn. He tried to take the wire from her. "I'll finish this." She hesitated, then let him, but she didn't walk away. Instead, she stood there, watching the way his hands worked, sure, patient, quiet. "You were in the war," she said finally. He froze, the twist of the wire caught halfway. "Who told you that?" "No one," she said softly. "But I can tell by the way you move, like you're always listening for something behind you." He looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly. "You read people too well." "I've had to." Their gaze held for a moment too long. Then he cleared his throat. "You're not like I imagined." "What did you imagine?" "A woman who'd ask where the money is." Her lips twitched. "Maybe I'm here for something else." He glanced up at her towering frame, her calloused hands, the scar that ran faintly along her wrist. "You're not here for what most men expect," he said. "No," she murmured, her voice turning quiet. "I'm not." By noon she had baked bread, boiled stew, and somehow coaxed a smile from Noah, the first he'd shown in months. The boy sat by the kitchen table, carving a stick with his father's old pocket knife. Mara leaned over, showing him how to shape it smooth. Her patience was soft, almost musical. When he nicked his thumb, she wrapped it gently with her kerchief and said, "Scars make strong hands." Silas saw it from the doorway and felt something twist in his chest. For years he had lived with silence, his own and his son's, and suddenly the sound of her voice in his house felt like air returning after a long winter. That evening they ate together, Noah between them, quiet but watchful. The fire crackled. Mara asked if there was any sugar for the tea. Silas chuckled, the sound rusty. "Sugar went out with the railroad shipment. But there's honey." "Then honey will do." She stirred it, her movements deliberate. Then, without looking up, she said, "People in town will talk." He paused mid-bite. "They always do. They'll say I'm too big, too strange. They said the same about me once," he said quietly. She looked at him, curiosity flickering. "Why?" He took a long breath. "Because I came back from war quieter than I left. A man who don't talk much makes people nervous." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe they'll think we're both dangerous." He met her eyes. "Maybe we are." Days turned into weeks. The ranch began to breathe again. Mara's presence changed everything, the rhythm, the warmth, even the smell of the place. She patched the roof, taught Noah to read again by tracing words in flour on the table, and sang old Irish songs while hanging laundry that fluttered like ghosts in the wind. But not everyone saw her worth. The townsfolk whispered every time Silas brought her into Cheyenne for supplies. She felt their stares when she stepped off the wagon, men gawking, women turning away. She heard the mutters, "That's Dana's giant. She'll eat him alive." At the general store, Mrs. Ward, the pastor's wife, leaned across the counter and said with a too-sweet smile, "My Mr. Dana, you found yourself a strong one. Must be hard to sleep under the same roof with someone who could toss you over the fence." Mara's hands froze on the flour sack. Silas's jaw tightened. "She can toss more than a fence," he said evenly. "She can toss a whole season's worth of work into order." The woman's smile faltered. "I only meant I know what you meant." Mara cut in softly, her tone like the edge of cold iron. "Don't worry, ma'am. I don't break things that aren't worth my time." Outside, Silas tried to hide his grin, but she caught it. "You enjoyed that," she said. He nodded once. "I did." The air between them was lighter after that, threaded with laughter that felt too rare to waste. One late afternoon, a storm rolled in fast from the mountains. The sky turned black, wind screaming through the fences. Silas ran out to tie the barn doors, but one latch had snapped loose. Mara didn't think twice. She waded into the rain beside him, lightning flashing across her face as she fought the wind. Together they hauled the gate shut, their fingers brushing, gripping, locking it in place. When the worst passed, they stood there soaked, breathing hard. The rain dripped down his face, tracing the scar above his brow. "You didn't have to come out here," he said, voice low. She met his eyes through the downpour. "I don't wait for men to save me, Silas Danner." For the first time, he said her name the way a man says it when he's thinking of more than just gratitude. "Mara." It came out rough, reverent. Something flickered in her chest, dangerous, tender, alive. They walked back to the house without speaking. The fire was dying, the air thick with the smell of rain and smoke. She handed him a dry towel, and when his fingers brushed hers, both froze. He swallowed hard. "You ever think maybe we were sent here for the same reason?" She tilted her head. "To fix what's broken," he nodded. "Maybe to remind each other that it's still worth fixing." That night, long after he and Noah had gone to sleep, she sat by the window, staring at the sky. Lightning still glimmered far off over the hills. The kind that came after storms, the kind that didn't destroy,